Hello and welcome to another episode of Steelfur Speaks. We are back again in Spreadsheet Town for the second episode in this series, just looking at the costs of cards and maintaining heroes and what that costs and how that works out. The first episode was based on the average cost to maintain a hero based on whether they're in a draft set or a supplemental set. So check that out if that sounds interesting. For those of you who aren't familiar with me, my name is Finbar, aka Steelfur. I'm a London-based Flesh and Blood and other TCG content creator. I've played Flesh and Blood since, early Crucible of War. I've played at RTNs, Pro Tours, all that kind of stuff. Reasonable competitive showing. Haven't really won anything major, but have, performed reasonably well. And I do also love diving into numbers and talking about design and strategy when it comes to Flesh and Blood. So if you like that sort of content, please do follow my channel. I am not the most active of content creators, as people who know of me will tell you. I'm very much a news reactivity focused person. I'm not afraid to take a break. But that does mean that you don't get filler videos from me. So I'm not here to record a video about every single piece of, top 10 things you didn't know about Azuri or those kind of things. The content you get from me will usually be substantive, critical, analytical, and, not necessarily on a schedule as much as other channels might be. Though I do like to, when I'm not on a break, I do like to put out a video at least once every 2 weeks. Just to keep some sort of regular flow of things going towards you. But, I'm not always go about every single little thing. So when I do a video, hopefully that hits more. And people who've been listening to me for a while will know that I am not afraid to criticize NSS. I am not afraid to dive into the meat of the discussion and get into what's actually happening in this card game. And that is what is going on here. So to quickly explain what you're seeing on the screen in front of you, I just went away and I built a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet has every single set in the game, every single class, and all the Majestics, super rares, and legendary sorted by those classes, as well as individual divisions for each hero, to understand and help us understand what the cost of buying the cards for that hero from that set would be. So we have an example here. Katsu in Crucible of War has a total of 10 cards. Those cards are... Sorry, I think this line is not supposed to be there. That's fine. That's not actually being used for anything. It's just a hangover from the template I was using. So in that set, there are 10 cards. This is the price per card. And this is the total you'd have to pay to buy every Katsu card currently in Crucible of War, and this was done on the 30th of March on Card Market, using their shopping wizard just to get me a bulk order of all of the Katsu and other cards in Crucible of War, and just saying how much would it cost for me to buy a set of every card in Crucible of War. Right, and you can see it goes up and down. So these are real prices. It's not live updating, so no one's getting access to this spreadsheet. It's not a market tracker. The point of doing a snapshot on a specific date is that you can come back at a later date, do another snapshot, and then say, hey, what has changed? And you'll see that while this is saying this is just the post-release pricing, because it's been a couple of years since Crucible came out, for outsiders, we're actually doing 1 week from release pricing, and we will put in post-release pricing here when we have more things to consider. So that's where this data came from. That's what the purpose of it is, and all of it is being collated into this big pivot table, basically, to look at what the average cost of buying a class in a set is, versus the average cost of buying, say, all the cards for a class that isn't the main class in that set. So you would have to spend £56 on average to buy a full play set of cards for like Katsu. You would have to spend £52 on average to buy a play set for someone like Benji or Fi, because there are specialization cards for Katsu and the other Welcome to Wraith heroes in Welcome to Wraith. So this is the price for buying the full set of cards on average for a hero that's included in the set, and this is the price for buying the set of cards you need for a hero that isn't the hero included in the set. So in Monarch, the example would be Prism on average might have to pay £251. Dromai might only have to pay £58. For example, it does differ. That is an average price. Then, of course, we have it for the supplemental sets. We also have it for assassins, different classes, and, of course, individual heroes. Which brings us to the topic of this video, which is what is the most expensive hero in the game currently to buy, and what is the most expensive class currently to buy, and what is the difference between those two. I mean, we'll break it down for you. It's all in that graph, so you can kind of see it. But let's talk about the differences, right? At the bottom of the scale, the cheapest hero to buy into, just based on class cards. Remember that we're not tracking generics because generics function differently to class cards. And I have a plan for generics, but I haven't implemented it yet. But it won't be tied to this sheet because this sheet is just about buying into a class. You know, obviously where you have things like a class not needing stuff like Fiandal Spring Tunic, Command and Conquer, E-Strike, suddenly the price of that class and the buy-in drops massively, right? But if we're just looking at this from a class perspective, we can look at this. How much does it cost for me to buy a full playset of wizard cards, right? No confusion, nothing there, just how much does it cost on average to me to buy a full playset of wizard cards. And we'll see that wizard is the lowest. You know, it only cost me £195 to buy every wizard card in any set ever made, right? Okay. And we can see here that Kano is the cheaper wizard by far, whereas Icelander does actually require roughly £150 more, kind of partly driven just by the interactions between you know, ice cards and things like that. So if wizard is the least expensive, well, technically wizard is the least expensive in terms of overall pricing, and warrior is the least expensive specific hero. We'll get back to that in a second. But if wizard is the least expensive, then ranger is the most expensive. This is driven by two things. I mean, the first thing we just have to acknowledge, if we go to the lovely Outsiders page, is that the prices for Outsiders cards are currently, you know, insane, right? You know, we do have this fact. I mean, Trench isn't bad, Quiver is not bad, but you do have the fact that Plague Hive is a playable Fabled and not just a, you know, a looks Fabled. And then, of course, we do have the price increase of Codex of Frailty and that kind of thing. So this is going to have to be revised in terms of Ranger. But the other big thing that's pushing Ranger over, because if you were looking at Outsiders, you'd say, hey, Azalea is probably the most expensive class and the specific hero in the game, but actually it's Lexi. And the other thing that's driving Ranger massively higher is that to have a full Ranger playset of cards, you have to go back to Tales of Aria. You have to buy New Horizon in there, which is £175. Even for a rainbow foil, you have to get Heart of Ice. You have to get Channel Lake Frigids. You have to get Shock Charmers, and you know, there are some very expensive cards that go across Ice and Lightning and Ranger and Elemental that just drive the price of Ranger up quite a bit. So that's why Ranger comes in at the top, even when I think Outsiders calms down a bit and we see maybe the rainbow foil of this of Plague Hive falling to about £80. Maybe when we see Codex of Frailty falling to maybe £15. Ranger is still very likely to be our most expensive hero in the game, just because of that overlap of being in Outsiders and also being in Tales of Aria. Tales of Aria currently seems to be one of our most expensive sets in terms of the average price per hero. Outsiders is currently higher, but you know, we covered this in the last video. The average price per hero to buy you know, one hero's worth of cards from a set is the highest in Tales of Aria, beaten only by Outsiders, but this has only just come out. So it's likely that Tales of Aria will continue to be the most expensive set on average to buy a full set of one hero's cards, just because of the elemental overlap and the 6 legendaries, and every class kind of needs 2 of them. So there's a lot of things going on to drive that price up. Then, of course, we have the other Rangers being buoyed by the cost of things like New Horizon and the cost of Outsiders. Then we have the Assassins, and again, that's just because all of the Assassin cards are new. And I mean, we also have the fact that we have, if we look at Dynasty, you know, we have not only quite a lot of cards in Dynasty, but quite a lot of cards that are currently quite highly priced. So, you know, Eradicate's quite highly priced, Leave No Witnesses, Surgical Extraction. We haven't had a lot of time for those prices to come down, especially with the set coming out in Outsiders as well. And then, of course, Outsiders is an interesting set because so many of the cards become playable across faction that to buy a full set of Assassin cards, for example, you have to include all of the Assassin/Ninja cards, which, you know, adds about £50. And, you know, then you've also got the role of Codex of Frailty running around, right? So that's kind of where we are on most expensive, least expensive, one of the things you'll realize is that the heroes that are most expensive are the heroes that have featured in a set that has talents. Every set that has talents adds both a talent legendary and usually other cards for that hero, and that means they are more expensive. Whereas if you remain just a regular talentless hero, bar the ones that were in Outsiders, you actually remain on the cheaper side of things, and that's kind of what's happening with Rhinar and Dorinthia, right? Rhinar and Dorinthia have cards that come in from Welcome to Wraith. They have very few cards that come in from the sets where there are talented heroes, right? Because they don't actually get to take, from Monarch, they actually only take 4 cards, 3 in the case of Rhinar, which means they don't actually have a huge amount of spend. I mean, you see the spend for Dorinthia to buy playable cards from... Ooh, that's something that's gone slightly wrong. I'll apologize for that. That's actually supposed to be an 013, so that will go up a small bit. This is why we stress test our models, guys. So that will go up a little bit. But for Rhinar, you can see that the buying cost is only £6 to buy all the playable Rhinar cards from Monarch, and you don't even need to buy those. And then there's no other brute cards except in Dynasty sets. And if you consider the average price per hero for a non-draft set is much, much lower. It comes in around £50 to £80. Then you start to see the fact that for someone like Rhinar, you see I have to resort this now because Dorinthia has moved up. But for someone like Rhinar, you're actually already really spending money on Welcome to Wraith, where you're going to go in and spend £35, and then you're going into these to these supplemental sets, and you're buying 20-30 pounds worth of cards, and then just calling it a day. And then what really drives the price up, to be honest, for those heroes, which is why I do want to comment on generics a bit, because it isn't fair to say these are the cheapest heroes to play, because the heroes that have had the least support are often the ones that need the generics the most to increase their power level. But if we think about someone like Dorinthia, who has her own equipment suite, who has her own capabilities, suddenly we're thinking about a hero that's actually quite attractive as a new player, because although some of the generic cards function in Dorinthia, they're not actually that good in terms of the synergy within the class. Same thing with Bolton, really. A lot of Bolton cards offer a lot of synergy. And then you're talking about the ability to build a synergistic deck, which is important to understand the difference between building a synergistic deck and building a meta deck. Synergistic decks are fun, and they're fun for new players because they work together. Meta decks are fun because they win, and they're better, they have synergy, and they have strong strategies. But a new player could, say, look at someone like Dorinthia or Bolton and say, hey, there's a lot of synergy here, and I can get into it cheaply because I don't need certain, big, expensive cards. Whereas a powerful meta deck like Lexi, for example, might drive that up. Now, also, I want to kind of finish around this note, because my next video is about what I think the most popular heroes are in Flesh and Blood based on the numbers that we're seeing in terms of spend and the cost of Majestics and things like that. So I don't want to go too much into specific outliers in terms of Majestic costs, but I will say I want to draw a line here just for people who are listening to this video. None of what I'm talking about at the moment is about meta decks. If you want to find out how much a meta deck costs, you can just go to Talashar, open the meta deck, and it will give you a summary of how much it would cost to buy those cards on TCG Player. Really what we're talking about here is in terms of averages or complete costs to buy out all the cards for a specific hero, with the assumption that the cheap cards aren't very good and the decent cards that might be good in the future are average and the good cards are expensive, right? So it's not I'm saying, oh, you're going to buy a load of bulk Majestics, but there is a certain amount of, well, all of the crap Majestics for certain classes only cost £1 in Crucible of War, but I am still saying that's £3, and that does add up. So that is just worth being aware of. Like, for example, I'm saying spend £10 on Katsu in Dynasty, and that does lead into the overall figure, but do you actually have to buy those cards to build the meta deck? Maybe not, but I think that from my perspective, the interesting question to me which I articulated at the start of this video, is what does it cost me to maintain a class in my collection? And when I'm maintaining a class in my collection, I'm doing that by buying every card that comes out. And if you told me, looking back, that I've spent £250 on Wizard and I've spent £1,000 on Ranger, I would say, why have I bought into Ranger when I could play Ninja, for example, be competitive and not spend that much? And that's kind of the final conclusion of this video I want to give to people. Like, if I was looking at this saying, what class should I buy into? I'm not looking at Ranger, and maybe I would when Outsiders calm down. I wouldn't recommend jumping on an Azalea bandwagon and buying all the cards, but Ninja's there. You know, lowest on average, lowest total spend to buy every playable card for Ninja. In terms of decks that are meta, but not overpriced. Still comes in below the average spend. But still very strong and very competitive. I wouldn't recommend anyone buys Brute or Warrior, to be honest, because they're just not doing that much in a competitive scene. But Icelander, I mean, we're thinking about how expensive it is to actually build an Icelander deck. The price isn't coming from the Wizard cards, is it? It's coming from the generics. But Ninja doesn't use as many generics. It uses Tunic, but, you have a lot of very strong equipment that can be bought cheaply. So that's just something to consider. Like, if you were thinking about buying in, what would you buy? But this isn't really a buy into Flesh and Blood, this is how cheap it is to buy certain heroes guide. This is more, what do statistics tell us about how heroes are behaving? And we'll say from this that Ranger price is driven quite highly by the onset of Outsiders. Outsiders itself has had a massively distorting effect on the total cost to buy into a site, a class, and it will be interesting to see what happens to that as we move into further away from the Outsiders release, whether or not it will balance out, or whether certain cards like Codex of Frailty will continue to drive that agenda.